Lights are bright. Thank you, Josh, and thank you, everyone, for that kindness. It's an honor to be with you here today to talk about something that I think is really important for our future, and it's this. No idea how that airplane got on the back of that slide, but I'll talk to my IT department about that. I will tell you, as a career fighter pilot, not a nuclear engineer, I didn't think until recently that I'd be giving these kinds of talks in these kinds of forums about a topic like the necessity of the nation coming up with a strategy for advanced nuclear. But I think it's critically important that we take a look at how are we going to get to the energy production capabilities that we're going to need in the future for our kids and our grandkids, while simultaneously getting our carbon emission levels down to where we all, I think all, know where they need to be. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. Let's start with a little bit of history, and just to show that this isn't a new kind of thing. Most people know that nuclear energy goes back quite a ways. And these guys, back in the beginning days of nuclear energy, as you can see, were pretty darn supportive of this as an initiative. And I want you to keep in mind, in particular, perhaps, President Kennedy's comments in the middle there about industrial revolutions, the first waves of modern invention, and the first wave of nuclear generation, nuclear power, because those are themes that I'm going to try to get back to before we're done here. So, yes, there has been a long history of nuclear energy in this country and the world, but this country is what I'm talking about today. And we led the world in developing this capability for quite a period of time. Unfortunately, for a variety of reasons, some of which I'll touch on later, we decided as a nation to take sort of a decades-long nap in the production of nuclear energy. And as a result of that, we are today faced with this triple challenge. Somewhat self-explanatory, but I'll cover each part of this very quickly. Climate security, I'm not here to argue about whether climate change is real, although it is, and whether or not man's activities are contributing to that climate change. But we are. But the fact is that we have a stated goal as a nation to get to net zero carbon emissions by the year 2050. 2050 is coming pretty quickly, believe it or not, and that would be a difficult challenge even if we were talking about today's total energy requirements for our economy and culture. If you add to that what's going to happen between now and 2050, which is a lot, it becomes a really, really difficult task that we need to take on. In economic security, there's a lot of advancements coming that you're going to hear quite a bit about today. Things like AI, things like the proliferation of data centers to support everything that's coming down the line. Those all present challenges to our energy infrastructure. And externally, we have our friends, the Chinese and Russians in particular, who are trying to beat us to the punch. And I'm sad to say they're ahead of us right now in some of these capabilities, and we need to catch up and take the lead like we have in a lot of other domains across our history. On the national security front, most people may not know this, but the military has awakened to the fact that the homeland is no longer a sanctuary. And so there are very serious vulnerabilities associated with tying the energy infrastructure of a military base to a local grid. So they're dealing with that. And then on the deployed side of the house, there are also very serious vulnerabilities associated with moving fuel convoys through bad guy territory to forward operating bases to fuel the diesel generators that we've already moved there in order to power those operations. One quick sad fact on that, after looking at Afghanistan, one fact that came out of that was the highest percentage of casualties that we took in Afghanistan were associated with the escort of fuel convoys going down to forward operating bases. We have to do something about that, and we are. There are projects in the works right now. In fact, there's a microreactor being built right now that hopefully someday will be a replacement for that whole scenario that I just described. The answer, I think, to all of these problems is tied up in what's at the bottom there. I'll describe that relatively quickly, and that is combining the use of land reactors, many of which are mobile, depending on their size and the scenario you're trying to use them for. And on the right, mobile marine nuclear capabilities that can be parked offshore or in shipbuilding yards or other places like that, both of which supplying constant heat and power to the processes that you see in the middle at the bottom. And those processes, if we do this right, are going to change dramatically over the next 25 years or so as we get into AI capabilities, as we get into advanced manufacturing. We can use these capabilities for the advanced production of things like you see on that slide. Fuel, hopefully synthetic fuel. That's a lot cleaner. Food, spare parts for you name it, desalinization of water, and the aforementioned data centers. I will tell you that both Microsoft and Google are looking seriously at using SMRs, small modular reactors, that I'll describe in a minute, to power some of these data centers in places where the local grid cannot support the heavy load required for data centers. All of that can come and be done correctly if we do it right. So what are these advanced reactors? I know there's a mix of experience in this audience regarding nuclear energy, but very quickly, small modular reactors, which include microreactors, refers to the fact that they will be designed and constructed in a factory kind of setting. Think of a reactor production facility, and then moved intact and completed to the site where they're going to be used. If it's a small one, you can put it in the back of an 18-wheeler or the back of a C-17. Larger ones get moved to the site where they're going to be used, and they might be combined with several others, depending on the power capacity that you're looking for, and then supported by the infrastructure that you see in the other two pictures. But the time and construction costs of that method of doing it compared to your uncle's nuclear power plant that takes 1 million years and $1 bazillion to build is an attractive part of this option. One note, the new comment at the top is in parentheses, only because, frankly, this isn't new. There's nothing new about this technology. The Navy's been using it for better than 70 years. Are they being refined, advanced? Absolutely. But the basic technology has not changed all that much in that amount of time. That's not the problem. I'll get into issues and challenges here in a minute. And by the way, under the safety category, if you're concerned about that, you might want to know that the Navy has operated right around 275 reactors over the last 70 plus years. And they have sailed 171 million miles and operated those reactors through 7,500 reactor years. And they have a perfect safety record. So put that in your calculations about the safety of this kind of capability. What are we going to use them for? A lot is the bottom line. Things like grid augmentation, plugging them into local grid to provide power. Frankly, not the best use of this kind of capability, but it can be done. Maybe more likely is in remote areas where there isn't a local grid to plug them into. Think about remote areas in Alaska and other places like that, where they're operating the same way that the military is operating downrange, using diesel generators and being dependent on the fuel that needs to be pumped into those generators 24/7, essentially. Industrial and petrochemical uses, hopefully again, synthetic fuel kinds of things. Data centers appear on here. As I said before, they are huge users of energy that we need to figure out how we're going to do that. And on military bases, I touched on that, and yeah, there's another airplane. But there's a reason for that one. That is actually an aggressor F-16 that is stationed at the base that appears below it. That is Eielson Air Force Base outside of Fairbanks, Alaska. And it has been chosen by the Air Force as the first site to put a microreactor on the base as part of an overall plan to replace the 50-year-old coal-fired power plant that lives on the base right now and provides that power, and brings with it all of the problems of a 50-year-old coal-fired power plant. So that's moving forward. Other uses, a couple of depictions on the side about size and transportability. Other users, potential users anyway, FEMA for disaster response, like in the case of, I don't know, a hurricane going ashore in New Orleans about now. I promise you that FEMA has moved lots of diesel generators into that area just in case the power goes down and they have to move the fuel there as well to do that. This might be a different option. Mining, the state of Wyoming is deeply into this and deeply into this financially to power mining operations in remote parts of Wyoming where they're going to pull rare earth kinds of materials out of the ground, but there's no grid to plug into. So that will be another use of that. Medical isotopes. Wouldn't it be nice if the OSF Cancer Center could produce their own medical isotopes as opposed to having them shipped in every morning, I think is how that works. Space. We were talking about space a minute ago for both thrust in satellites, getting them into orbit and hopefully moving them around in orbit as required. And then also when the days come and we're putting stations on odd things like the moon, there's no grid up there. So we got to figure out how we're going to power that. So that's another potential scenario we can use this capability. It's another one. Anyway, there is actually a reason this airplane's on the side other than I used to fly those. Just imagine if we had advanced nuclear reactors tied to synthetic fuel production capability, and we could provide all of DoD, which is the largest fuel user in the nation, and the airline industry with cleaner synthetic fuel. Wouldn't that be a nice thing to have? Issues and challenges, and these aren't all of them, but you'll recognize some of the names up here. The first three. What I would say about the first three, I could get into a detailed explanation of those from my point of view and many others that I work with. But I would ask you guys to do the research on those three scenarios. I think you'd be surprised at what the real details are on what happened, what didn't happen, why it happened, who did what, et cetera, et cetera. I think you might come out with perhaps a different impression about nuclear safety. I'll mention just one at the top, Chernobyl. One of the guys I work with is the director of nuclear studies at MIT. He would tell you that Chernobyl was more of a crime scene than an accident scene. And that's based on Russian activities before, during, and after that incident. Imagine that, the Russians doing something like that. Hollywood sounds kind of strange, but they are a bit of an issue. If you look at some of the Hollywood productions that have come out over the years, the China Syndrome, even Oppenheimer recently, they either contribute to some false ideas about the safety of nuclear energy, or they confuse the two categories of nuclear energy and nuclear weapons, which are about that far apart. So I would recommend, if you're looking for a more objective Hollywood production that talks about nuclear, there is a movie that came out in 2022 produced by Oliver Stone, called Nuclear Now, which is a very good, objective depiction of nuclear energy, particularly advanced nuclear energy, and how it could be used in the future. Renewables, a challenge only because we know there are people out there that say we can get to this scenario in 2050 by just using renewables, primarily wind and solar. And I'm not disregarding hydro, hydrogen, geothermal, battery storage, other things that fall into that category. But I'm here to tell you, we can't get to where we need to get in 2050 without nuclear being part of the mix. And in fact, recently at COP28, the World Economic Forum, the world agreed that nuclear needs to be part of the mix. And not only that, but the world needs 3 times the nuclear energy production capability that we have today. So we kind of got to get after it. And then our friends, the Chinese and Russians, always in the mix, let's say. So how do we do this? Number 1 and number 2 is educate. Not only educating the American public about the facts about nuclear energy, the technology, the safety, the future, all of that, so they have fact-based, objective information so they can make a decision about where we go with nuclear energy. But we also need to educate, and we're working this, but we need to ramp it up. We need those high-level nuclear engineers, and we need the people also who are going to operate and maintain these reactors when they're out in the field. So that's the education piece. And also the workforce development piece. We're going to need that very badly over the next 25 years. Supply chain development, primarily because of this little 30-year or so nap we took in this kind of capability development, we became dependent on some undependable sources for things like uranium. We were getting that from the Russians. We don't do that anymore, so we need, as a nation, figure out and develop the capability to not only get our own uranium, but enrich our own uranium for these reactors. So, in closing, I'll tell you, my opinion is this is what we have to do. We have to imagine a brighter future. Start with the end in mind. So we need to take an objective look as a nation. What is 2050 going to look like? What are those energy requirements going to look like? What do we want our carbon emissions to look like? 0 would be a good answer. And how do we get there? This needs to be part of that solution. And thank you for listening.